Hello and welcome back to Celluloid Circuits, the podcast where we boot up the big screen and explore how technology lives, breathes, and sometimes dictates our destinies in film. I'm sorry for the long hiatus, but recent political events have removed a lot of my motivation to make these. But enough about me, let's get back into it. But first, a new section in our podcast, the soapbox. It's here. The real of the future is today. What am I talking about? Well, in the circle, they called it soul search. In real life, we're calling it search party. And how do they sell it? By appealing to our emotions, in this case involving lost pets. Most of us saw the Ring ad during the Super Bowl. And if you didn't see it then, I'm sure you've seen it due to the outpour of criticism and how much this looks like mass surveillance, especially since up until recently, Ring was going to enter into an agreement to share its footage with Flock. I'm not going to go into what Flock is here, but I suggest you look it up. But due to the negative criticism that they've received from a lot of us, they've walked that back. It shows we can make a difference. So let's continue. Thanks for listening to the Soapbox and back to our regularly scheduled programming. As always, I'm Anthony. And today we're diving into a double feature that's all about how much control we really have over our lives when powerful tech steps in to predict it for us. These two films on the surface couldn't be any more different. One's about genetics, the other's about psychic crime prediction. But under the hood, they're both cautionary tales about how easily technology turns probability into certainty, stripping us of agency along the way. So if you haven't guessed it, our first film we're going to start with is Gattaca. This movie came out in 1997 and it was directed by Andrew Niccol. And we've discussed him before with Anon, which he wrote, produced, and directed. Gattaca builds this beautifully cold, retro-futuristic world where genetic engineering is so normal and mundane that it's basically irresponsible not to do it. Couples visit these sleek clinics, pick the best embryos, screen out diseases, and even fine-tune traits like height or eyesight. And it's all sold as giving your kid the best start in life. In one scene, it shows Vincent's parents meeting with a man working in one of these clinics as he's discussing with the parents that from their retrieved eggs, they've been fertilized with a father's sperm and they have 4 healthy embryos, 2 girls and 2 boys. And there's a line in the film that does a good example of not only how mundane this has become, but also how people who don't have these modifications are viewed by society. And here's the quote. I've taken the liberty of removing all prejudicial traits such as early balding, propensity to violence, myopia, obesity, alcoholism, addiction. And that's paraphrasing. Now let's examine the word chosen. Prejudicial. Its simple meaning is something harmful to someone or something. The reason it's harmful is because having these type of phenotypes expressed, the early balding, obesity, myopia, would create a negative bias in others' eyes towards this specific individual. This is apparent in a scene where Vincent's parents are told that Vincent is not able to attend a school because the school's insurance will not cover him if he has an accident. Because of how mundane genetic alteration is, DNA becomes people's permanent resume. When people are born, their blood is immediately prints out a list of their life expectancy, risk factors, and psychological markers. These tiny numbers dictate everything, what jobs they'll be eligible for, what type of insurance they can get, and who will even bother to date them. When Vincent, now Jerome, goes in for an interview, they ask him to pee in a cup. They screen his DNA and offer him the position. He asks, "What about the interview?" And their response is, "That was the interview." In another scene in the film, Uma Thurman, who plays Vincent's love interest, takes a sample to a genetic matchmaker of sorts. This shows how genetics is even used in dating or planning relationships. When your DNA can determine your future, there's no free will or hope. So, the story follows Vincent Freeman, played by Ethan Hawke, who was conceived naturally and what the film refers to as a faith birth. After he's born, he gets a little pinprick and his DNA is analyzed. His genetic readout says he has a 99% chance of heart failure and a lifespan of 30 years. This one printout basically seals his fate, so much so that even his own father, who was originally going to name him after himself, chooses not to. But Vincent dreams of going to space and working for a company like the Gattaca Aerospace Corporation. But of course, that's impossible for someone with his genetic profile. So he takes on the identity of Jerome Morrow, played by Jude Law, a former swimming star who was genetically flawless but ended up paralyzed after an accident. So you're asking, where's the tech? Well, the tech is literally the blood of this film, so to speak. This movie is all about hacking. The definition of hacking is the act of identifying and exploiting weaknesses in digital devices or networks to gain unauthorized access. But in this world, instead of computers, we're talking about biohacking. And this is where the film really gets fascinating. It becomes a ritual of biological deception. Vincent scrubs off loose skin each morning. He scrapes under his fingernails, wears false fingerprints laced with Jerome's blood, even straps on urine pouches so that every sample he gives tests as valid, to not give away his true status in society, even to the point of placing fake eyelashes and loose skin on his keyboard to continue to pass through inspection. The tiniest slip could ruin him. There's a nail-biting scene where an unexpected blood test at work nearly exposes him, saved only by a pinprick that miraculously hits the blood pouch. The tech here isn't flashy. It's subtle and insidious. Little handheld DNA analyzers, silent collectors that take stray hairs off desks. It's surveillance that feels casual, every day, and because of that, it's all more terrifying. Now, to ramp up the tension, there's a murder at Gattaca, just days before Vincent is supposed to leave on his mission to Titan. The investigators sweep the building, literally vacuuming up stray DNA samples. They find one of Vincent's true eyelashes. Suddenly, he's the prime suspect, not because of the evidence that he committed a crime, but just because his invalid status means that he shouldn't even be there. Again, this invalid status is the new way people have bias placed upon them. So while everyone's searching for an imposter, Vincent keeps pushing forward, hiding in plain sight. Watching Gattaca today is unsettling because it doesn't feel like sci-fi anymore. We already have consumer DNA kits, 23andMe, Ancestry, and some that even claim to tell us our risks for Alzheimer's, heart disease, and even certain cancers. And we're seeing debates over whether employers or insurers should have access to your genetic information. There are laws like GINA, the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act. These laws state that your health insurance cannot use your DNA to base medical premiums or deny coverage. However, the law does allow for long-term disability insurance or life insurance to use DNA to not only set premiums, but deny coverage if need be. It's already a step in terms of judging someone based on their DNA. And then there's CRISPR. The idea of editing embryos to avoid disease is already more than a hypothetical. In 2018, a Chinese scientist announced he created the first ever gene-edited babies, and the world recoiled. But the tech never went away. We're already standing on Gattaca's doorstep, and I believe we're about to step through. Now let's jump to our next film, Minority Report. Directed by Steven Spielberg in 2002 and based on the story by Philip K. Dick, it throws us into Washington, D.C. about 50 years into the future. Violent crime has virtually disappeared thanks to PreCrime, a special police division that uses 3 psychics known as the Precog who are able to predict murders before they happen. And their visions are pumped into this stunning data display where investigators can pull apart the future like detectives at a crime scene that just hasn't occurred yet. Tom Cruise plays John Anderton, the chief of PreCrime. He's hunted by the kidnapping of his son years earlier, and this fuels his obsessive belief in stopping crime before it starts. I mean, this movie is a playground of futuristic tech. We've got gesture-based computers long before we had touchscreens. Anderton, played by Tom Cruise, starts waving his hands to scrub through a video, slow them down, look at multiple angles, essentially manipulating reality. And the city itself is wired for total biometric tracking. Ads call out your name after scanning your retina. Most unsettling, the police deploy spider-like surveillance drones that crawl under doors, scanning residents' eyes while they're taking baths or eating dinner, all in search of a suspect. And all this is done without a warrant. Privacy doesn't exist. And people in this world seem to be numb or accustomed to it. And it's really just surveillance presented with Spielberg's signature glossy wonder, and that kind of only makes it creepier. So things take a turn when the system spits out a new prediction. Anderton himself is going to murder a man named Leo Crow in just 36 hours. Suddenly, the hunter becomes the hunted. Those same iris scanners that once let him breeze through security now betray him at every turn. In one of the film's most disturbing sequences, he gets an illegal eye transplant so the system stops recognizing him. And it's similar to biohacking as in Gattaca, literally having to change his biometrics just to navigate through a city. Watching Minority Report now is almost unsettling in how close it feels to what's around us. Police departments across the US use predictive tools like PredPol or ShotSpotter, which analyzes crime data to forecast where crimes might occur. And critics really have an argument here. They point out that these systems often reinforce existing biases, sending more patrols into communities that are already over-policed, creating a feedback loop that kind of feels uncomfortably close to pre-crime. Then there's facial recognition. Cities like London and even some US airports are already deploying it at scale, scanning people's faces against a database, often without consent. Even live venues, such as Madison Square Garden, use facial recognition to keep people who are banned from entering the venue. And that seems okay, right? But they've taken this a step further. Lawyers who are part of a firm that may be suing the venue have been denied access, regardless if they have any presence on the team actually involved in the case, leading to the discussion of where does this helpful technology stop becoming useful and just surveillance for those in power. And let's not forget personalized advertising. Sure, your phone isn't literally calling out your name on the street, but your social feeds do eerily accurate advertising targeting that feels straight out of those retina scanning billboards. Also, just the sheer amount of cameras that are out there now in the world, and all these tied together by companies like Flock, which gives law enforcement agencies access to these cameras, is just scary. Now, what ties these two films together is how each society has surrendered completely to technological predictions. In Gattaca, your DNA is your destiny. Employers, insurance companies, even potential lovers trust a printout more than who you are. And it's so normalized that nobody questions it. They just quietly accept their place. In Minority Report, it's not your genes, but your potential future actions being policed. The entire city is engineered to eradicate uncertainty, and that need for certainty becomes its biggest weakness because life is messy, humans are messy, and a prediction isn't the same as fate. Sometimes I ask myself, would we even resist these technologies? If we could nearly eliminate murder, like in Minority Report, how many people would vote to keep pre-crime, even knowing that it meant jailing people for crimes they hadn't committed yet? If we could screen embryos to avoid cancer, how many people would actually decline that, even knowing that it could potentially lead to a society like Gattaca? That's what makes these films stick. They don't just present shiny gadgets. They show how quickly we'd rationalize giving up freedom in the apparent name of safety or optimization. And just really quick, the United States already has its own dark history with eugenics, but the system in Gattaca is really all that's needed to bring that back under the guise of science, which makes it all the more dangerous. In Gattaca, it's made clear that these modifications are expensive and reserved for the elite, and that the invalids, due to their nature, can't get higher paying jobs, which leaves them impoverished and unable to provide that type of manipulation or modification for their children, which creates this very creepy genetic underclass. Alrighty, folks, that's it for today's deep dive into Gattaca and Minority Report, two films that even decades later are cautionary tales that would be wise to rewatch, especially now with everything going on. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing and leaving a review. It really does help more people find this show. You can also check out more of my work at riosdoesit.com. And you can find all the show notes and past episodes at the podcast website linked in the episode description. Again, thank you so much for listening. And remember, the future is only a reel away.